But this idea of leadership is something that seems to be very much at the forefront of our thinking, either at work or in our societies at the moment. And I want to challenge the way that you think about it, because it's my belief that leadership is not about the rank, the scale, the points, the status, the brass plaque, the size of your desk. It's got nothing to do with any of those things. Leadership is about the choices you make, and in particular, the choices that influence and impact the people around you. Now, if that's the case, then that says that we all make leadership choices on a daily basis. We don't have to have a title or a position. We make them as we bump into people, even in our daily activity. So what we identified is that there's two continuums we can map these things on. So one of them is, where's your focus of care? What do you care about? Do you care about me at the cost of others? Or do you care about the greater good? And I can be anywhere along that continuum. The other continuum is one of, what's your level of commitment to that choice? And so we've got this level of commitment that goes from low, fairly passive, to high, that maybe requires taking a little bit of risk and focusing on truly what I'm trying to achieve. So, now, if you plot those two continuums, you can end up with what I call the 4 choices of leadership. 4 quadrants that allow us to think about leadership choices in a slightly different way. I just want to take a little while to walk through those 4 with some examples. If we start at the bottom right-hand quadrant, that's what I call a destructive leadership choice. It's when I have a high level of commitment to a self-focused choice. Now, destructive doesn't mean that I'm throwing chairs and tables around when I'm in a meeting. It can be quite subtle. So the example that I usually use of a destructive leadership choice is, well, have you ever been in a meeting and partway through the meeting, the person who called the meeting goes to their hip and pulls out their phone and starts responding to something? And so everybody's just on pause for a minute while the person who called the meeting deals with that. And what's their focus of care gone to? Themselves. At the cost of who? Everybody else. Yeah, so they're making a self-focused choice. And usually, how committed is that person to being on their phone rather than being part of the meeting? Very. So that might be an example of a destructive leadership choice. Quite subtle, but it's still having a negative impact on the people around. And that influence is turning things down the wrong path rather than the right path for that leader. So if I slide things down that bottom continuum a little bit, I can get to a less committed choice, but still focused on self. And this is what I call a compliant or a passive leadership choice. This compliant choice is when I'll take the path of least resistance. I'll do whatever's easiest for me. Has anybody ever experienced that? Yeah, I mean, many of you now are demonstrating examples of that, where I just sit back and hope that somebody else will take the answer for me. That can be a passive choice. And yep, I hope that somebody else does. I hope that somebody else picks this up. And you've probably all been part of a meeting or a situation where somebody said, I need someone to pick this up and run with it. And everybody sat there quietly. And they're all making compliant leadership choices until somebody makes a different one and says, well, I guess I'll take it. And it's usually the same person each time, which we'll get back to in a minute. But that's what I call a compliant leadership choice. The next choice is when I see this vertical continuum and I start to understand the greater good, the interconnectedness between me and the people that I'm working with, then I can at least make a productive leadership choice, which is when I will help us succeed. This is where I see the interconnections, and I may still be fairly low in commitment, but I'm willing to help us succeed. Anybody think about what that might look like in a small setting like this? No, that's compliant for most of you. Yeah.
So somebody speaks up.
Somebody speaks up, yes. Somebody answers the question. Simple as that. Asks a different question, just tries to help the situation, because they know that the more interactive, the more it's going to be engaging for everybody. If it's just one person talking, then it tends to get boring. If it's interactive, then it becomes about you and your work. And so that's a greater good choice. And it doesn't matter how committed you are, you're helping the greater good. And the final quadrant is when I see that greater good, that interdependence, and I am willing to really put some commitment to it, I can make what I call a transformative leadership choice. This is not just that I'll help succeed, but I will ensure that we are successful. And this takes an extra level. So rather than just answering the question, it's bringing something a little bit different. It's answering the question that somebody else has whispered in their ear because they don't want to ask it. It's raising a question that feels like it's awkward or challenging a little bit more because it's the right thing to do. And have you ever been in class where the teacher said, ask a question, because if you've got it, it's likely that somebody else has got it. Well, those people who ask those questions and are bold and raise their hand are quite often making what I would call transformative leadership choices. And you can probably see how you have made choices in all 4 quadrants. We've all made choices in all 4 quadrants in the last week. And my aim is to get people to make more of them in the top half than the bottom half. And that way they become more productive and transformative leaders in the communities, the world, and the workplaces that they work. So just to run through another example, that when you come to this country with an accent like mine, it's a legal requirement to coach soccer. That's what they told me. So start in the morning coaching different people's kids, my kids, refereeing games. And as I blew the final whistle on the last game on Saturday afternoon, my last job was to take the nets down and put them in the shed. And at this point, it was fascinating to me because I saw all 4 of these choices playing out on the sidelines. As I blew that whistle, I'd turn to the sidelines to look for some help, and I'd see that one parent already marching towards me with his or her finger cocked and loaded, ready to give me the full benefit of their opinion as to how my last call has destroyed their 6-year-old's chances of playing in the next World Cup. You all know that kind of person? Yeah. They're making that kind of choice. And what kind of choice would you say that was?
Very destructive.
Destructive, yeah. Destructive. Very committed to self-focused choice at the cost of other people. Then I'd see those other people who, when I was looking for some help, would always seem busy doing nothing. They'd have intense breathing to do or something like that. So, but they never would help. And even this went as far as if you called them and said, unless you help, your kid's not going to have a team, they'd say, oh, that's a shame. And that would be, so what kind of choices do you think they're making?
Very compliant. Go with whatever, right?
Very compliant. Yeah, I'll do whatever is the least possible in order to get by. And so very compliant leadership choice. Now, occasionally I blow the final whistle and I'd turn to the edges and say, can somebody help me take the nets down? And a bunch of people would say, sure, I'll help. What kind of choice? Productive. Yeah, so they were willing to help. And then rarely, very rarely, I'd blow that whistle, I'd look to the sidelines, and there'd be nobody there. And I'd go, oh. But then as I turned to the goalmouth, I'd realize that one of the parents, understanding that this was the last job for us all to be able to get out of there, had already coordinated the other ones to go start taking the nets down. And what kind of choice was he or she making?
Oh, transformative.
Transformative, yeah. Now, the interesting thing for me was 2 weeks later when you go to the community picnic and you see those same 4 people, guess what kind of choices they're making?
Same ones.
The same ones, yeah, exactly the same choices. Because we get into a pattern or a habit of making a choice in one quadrant more so than others. And that's what I mean when I say I'm trying to drive people to make more choices in the top half of this than the bottom half, because if we can make our habit to make productive and transformative choices, we'll have a significantly greater influence on the world around us.